while you guys are getting settled, we just wanted to mention something. Winnie and I are both on the board of the foundation. All of the money from the series goes to the foundation, which is the nonprofit wing of the Writers Guild. We do all the educational outreach, the library. And last year when we did the series with some incredible guests, we did film it like we did this time. And next week we're going to have the DVDs if you want to get them.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, that you could, if you wanted to, you could buy some or all or whatever of last year's guests, which I have to say, we've had every single person that's come, including, of course, tonight. It's just been remarkable. It's been really not only people that we personally admire tremendously, but people who just, I think what's exciting is it's people who are taking a very personal view of this business. I think it's really important to bring the personal, you know, into the political, which is certainly what you do in your work, but also to bring the personal into our business, because there's so much corporatizing of our business and our world that a personal approach for me is extreme. It's gone beyond refreshing. It's become something that I must have in order to breathe, if you see what I mean. So anyway, that's just my little pitch for possibly next week. You might want to look at or buy one or two of last year's.
Yeah, Winnie and I get 4
offerings.
cents. No, we don't get anything. It all goes to the foundation. But last year, and then we'll go right into your questions for Stephen.
This isn't off the record. Oh shit! No, I'm kidding.
Last year we had Winnie and I did one night. We had Don Roos, and for those of you who are here, he's got this kitchen timer thing that you will all become obsessed with. We had Tom Schulman. And
we'll talk about the kitchen timer next week.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
Talk about the kitchen timer. Are you kidding me? I have a kitchen timer thing.
Are you kidding?
Ruse is stealing my. Okay, hold on.
Don Roos.
Okay, I'll tell you. Let me tell you my thing. No, don't tell me. Don't tell me. You'll think I'm stealing it, because I'll tell you. When I've taught, you might hear me talking a little bit around the edges of that. Writing is sometimes hard for me to do, and so I sought out professional help. Therapist who I've now been seeing. I've put like all his kids through school. It's amazing. And he's great. Whatever. It'll sound like a character in Larry David or something. But he said to me, he said, here's a trick, try it. And he said, set an egg timer for 3 minutes right by your computer. Get down on your knees and beg God to let you write the worst sentence ever written. Really sincerely, like you're just inside screaming, begging, please, 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 God, let me write. And he goes, inside of 3 minutes, if that thing goes off, ding, you have to be writing. You have to. You will be rewarded with the worst sentence ever written. It's unbelievable, but it works. It works. It's the greatest trick on earth.
I'm loving that. And you can make the worst sentence
No, but I will, if you guys are here next week, I'm going to give you a copy of the kitchen timer thing, but you can also, if you want to hear Don talking about it, this was like the single thing that people got completely obsessed with from the last series. But I now work with a kitchen timer, but I work with...
This is an interesting corollary. I mean,
yeah, I'll have to get a new timer because I'm working now with a gong. And it only goes, it doesn't go in 3-minute intervals, but I could do it, a kitchen timer.
There was one question I wanted to ask Stephen, but I didn't get to. Can I jump in? Or
yeah.
But everybody has.
And then we really will go to.
I did want to ask you about your research, because I never used to research, and then the last 2 things I wrote, which didn't get made, but I researched them both just because I felt like I had to, because I didn't understand otherwise how I was going to do it. And both times, I felt a sense of weird worry or anxiety or responsibility that was kind of fucking me up a little bit, although I did end up writing both things to my happiness. I mean, ultimately, I was pleased with what I wrote. But both times I had fears about what people I had actually met with and interviewed, what they would think. And I was just wondering how you, if you've ever experienced that or how you deal with it.
He killed that guy. He just killed him.
No, I mean, that's pretty, yeah, maybe that does say it all. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I admire that,
Yeah, no, that's a huge issue, particularly if you're talking to people who could have you killed, which is definitely something I've done a lot of, or more than I should. You know, I met, I just whatever. You know, I met a lot of really oddly dangerous people in SYRIANA, and they never are like what you think they are. They're not at all like they are in movies. They're actually really different and really scary because they're not like you think they're supposed to be. And then you realize you've just been threatened, and you're like, wait a second, that was the least histrionic death threat. How'd you do that? It's like you're talking in my head. But so, I mean, I've had a million. It's an eternal problem, which is how I usually handle it is I go really off book. Like I just go, all the research is just stuff that goes into like a hopper, and it gets, you know, they're great quotes that I know I'm going to use sometimes, but in general, it gets ground up, and it comes out in a new way. I've never, you know, I've had books as underlying material, and there's nothing from the book, and you know, and then the people I met, you know, I had to change in SYRIANA, for instance. Warner Brothers Legal discovered kind of late, and I actually, it was an honest mistake. I had misplaced some notes, and a couple of the best scenes that would have been in SYRIANA were just way too close to something that really happened, you know, that someone told me about. And it's not a public figure. No one would ever, who would know? Except you're dealing with, you know, Exxon. And so, you know, Time Warner gets really nervous. And I had to cut him. You know, one of my, probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. As the film was done, it was locked. And it was just brutal. And so I learned a really valuable lesson right there, where I was like, you know, it's such a gray area to me legally too, because, you know, you're not talking to someone who's written a book, who's processed their own story. You know, they don't understand their own story. You know, they don't know the context. They don't know what's moving about it. They don't know anything about it. That's not what they do. They're someone who did something. Maybe they were a lawyer or an oil executive or this or that. Every once in a while you meet someone who's a great storyteller, and they do understand what their story's about. But in my experience, once. Out of like 500 people I've interviewed professionally, or 1,000, one person. And so it's, I don't understand to this day, you know, legally, morally. I'm like, where did what they tell me stop, and what I have done to give it importance, you know? And what happens is a lot of times these people, you know, because what you've done is turbocharge their experience. You've made it, you know, frankly, more interesting. You know, you've taken the high points, you've crafted them, you've done what they, you know, you can't do when you're living a life. And people, you know, they can just look at it and say, you know, so you have to be really careful. So I mean, I try to go so far away from anything that could be. And that one, like 2 instances, the stories this guy told me were so good. They were so specific. They were so, you could never make them up. You'd never get them right. You'd never seen anything like it. They were perfect about his experience getting the rights to oil fields in Kazakhstan. And and the other thing I do, technically, is I just merge. I'll take like 3 things and just jam them together, right. And then it kind of hides the tracks a bit. But usually by the time you do the thing you're concerned about on the first draft, by the time you get to whatever draft it is, it's transmogrified. But I am, you know, now having done 2 really research-intensive pieces, and I'm definitely going to do another one. It's like buy life rights. Don't talk to the person. You know, just avoid it. You know, I'm lucky. I've never been sued by anybody. I've been sued by one person, but it was preposterous because it was a script written in a language I don't read that I never saw, that, you know, had nothing to do with me. But the people that could sue me, you know, or could say, have luckily been very generous. You know, that
like that dude who the Clooney character was based on in SYRIANA, right?
Well, he's a very specific case where he had written a book, See No Evil, and it's actually so interesting. His book was about tracking down who did the bombing in Beirut in '84, and I read it, and there was the whole book is about this one thing basically, and he was Iraq bureau chief, and in '96 when there was a coup d'etat. Oh no, I'm fine. In that book, there was one little interlude that got my attention. And this is exactly, kind of weirdly what you're talking about. It was about a Lebanese American businessman who was called in front of Congress, to the Senate, to testify about campaign donations to Bill Clinton. This is a guy who operates in that really murky area of big, big money, arms and oil. He'll get 20 fighter jets for Israel, and there'll be 12 tankers of oil leaving Iran, and there's some kind of weird shift in Russia, and he walks away with $1 billion. These guys exist. Anyway, in this book, his testimony is so enlightening, and this is where the whole movie started. He stood up, he took the oath, and they said, you gave $300,000 to the, Clintons, for Clinton for the re-election campaign through all these different ways. What did you expect to get from it? He had no lawyer. He showed up by himself, took the oath. He's like, what did I expect to get for it? What do you think I expected to get for it? He's like, I got to sleep in the White House. I don't care about that. I got pictures with Bill Clinton all over the world. No one knows me, but everyone knows Bill Clinton. And they see I know Bill Clinton. It legitimizes me. It helps my business. In fact, it's the best single investment I've made in my business. Next election cycle, I plan to double it. I was like, well, that's interesting. And so I thought, wow, does he know this guy? Does Bob know him? So I said, all right, I'll meet Bob. And I met him and I said, look, I read your book. I don't think it's a movie. That's the bad news. But you're awesome. And like, if you'll help me, maybe there's something. And that isn't, actually that was the second meeting, because the first one I just wanted to hear him talk. And I didn't say anything to him about his book. And he talked. And I was like, wow, this is such an interesting person. He's so legit, 20 plus years in the CIA, and he knows all these quirky guys, this intersection of oil and arms and foreign policy. And so anyway, so I just said, to him, I said, look, I don't think your book's, I think post 9/11, the paradigm shift, and we have to figure out what it is. What are we talking about? But if you'll help me, if I can follow you around, I'd be up for it. And we'll, option your book and we'll figure it out. And so
wait, so you did option the book?
Yeah, Soderbergh, it had been sent to Soderbergh at Warner Brothers, Section 8. And Stephen had read it, or he never looked at it, actually, that's not true. He looked at a chapter of it, and then he just said, oh, send it to Gaghan, see if he can make any sense of it. So
the guy profited in the sense that his book was optioned.
Right, absolutely. But then he also, he also had this weird experience of it ended up getting tossed into like the original screenplay category for the Academy and everything, because there's nothing from the book in it. And that's such a gray area, because there's nothing from his book, nothing. But the spirit of Bob suffuses the whole piece. I mean, his attitude towards Washington lawyers, people he introduced me to, who introduced me to people, are straight up in there, And I remember he called me, and it was this, such a lucky break, and you make these breaks, you make them by reaching out and just like knocking on doors and kind of trying to always be interested in stuff. And he called me up and he goes, all right, if you're really interested in seeing how the Middle East works, are you? And I said, yeah. He goes, okay, then come with me to the south of France in August. I was like, what? I'm just on the phone in my house. Come with me to the south of France in August to learn how the Middle East works. Write that down, Gaghan. That's interesting. I was like, sure. I'm like leaving my house. I'm joking around because I live west of the 405. I'm like, Beirut, is that east of the 405? Where is Beirut? And we started off in Nice. I met him in Nice, and we ended up going to Beirut and to all over. And it was just the most remarkable thing, the day one. He just blew my mind, and like everything about him. The numero uno about CIA officers is, and I found this out much later, actually after I'd finished the movie SYRIANA, but I could never put my finger on it, but I was like, God, these guys are weird. I was talking to this other guy, and he said, oh, well, he's like, Steve, first thing they do in training is, it's almost like therapy. They teach you the exact opposite of human interactions, which is, I don't have to reveal anything about my emotional interior life to you in this conversation. And they train you to just go flat. And in that flatness, whoever you're talking to starts to spill the beans and fill in that space because it's so awkward. but it's so hard to put your finger on something like that. Like, what's...
I thought there was a wonderful moment you captured with Clooney early on in SYRIANA with his son at Princeton. And the son is saying, like, having like a normal conversation, like, gee, that would be cool, like, to go live in he says, like, in Spain or Ghana, you know, for you to be a diplomat somewhere. And Clooney is like, how's your mother? It's like he not only doesn't respond to what the kid is saying, but we also know that in a way, the kid, he's asking a question that has no answer. It's such a stonewall.
I also like to answer what you were saying is, you know, when you're asking these people questions, quite often I find that they're not telling me the truth. You know, they're just, it's just on and on and on. You know, it's very rare that they say anything truly revealing. Mostly what they're doing is they're obfuscating, and they're trying to win a point and win you over to their side. Usually there's an enormous amount of ego. They're convinced that what they're doing is right, and they're trying to sell you on it. And you're like this kind of, you know, you're not a journalist. It's not going to be in the New York Times. It's off the record. So a lot of times these people just want to talk, you know, and they'll say the craziest stuff, but it's always spun. And so I'm just trying to suss out what the, you know, I'll give you an example about traffic. I went in, you know, that Tijuana thing with the police guy. That happened much later. Very early in my research, when it was still going to be a satire, I went to the Pentagon, and I went to see the Deputy Secretary of Defense, the DepSecDef. This is 1998. The DepSecDef for counter-narcotics.
It's like a rap star.
Yeah, the DepSecDef for counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism. And this tells you about so much about our world. Think about it. 98, Pentagon, one guy, one office, one budget, counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism.
The whole thing.
Counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, same job.
Yeah,
Okay?
That does say a lot.
1998, not that long ago. So I'm in like the D ring or C ring of the Pentagon. I've never been there. I've got a card. I'm like, no one's with me. I'm just wandering around. Like, it's this, you know, mile-long hallway. It's much bigger than you expect.
Now, is this like set up by Fox, or how? I mean, how do
This is total fluke. How?
I mean,
Okay,
I'm
practical
curious to know,
terms.
like, how do you get into?
You know, can I just cut in for 1 second? Because I just want to make an observation that I think just a
sweeping
macro observation. After sitting here for a while and listening to how Stephen's life works, just in general, how things are coincidental, and this leads to that, and it all feels random, and it's all murky, and he doesn't really know, is it a satire, is it this or that? Do you see how that plays out in how he writes? It is an extension of who he is as a human being and how he lives his life and how he operates. And look at that, the things that he's fascinated by, the things he's bedeviled by, but also his experience of life is the movies are a metaphor for how his life unfolds. And I'm sorry, just listening to you, because you are a guy, I mean, you have had more fascinating stories happen to you just that you've told tonight than I think I've had my whole life. But again, just for you guys being writers.
There was a long backlog where nothing happened. And
no, so you're making up.
No, but you know what, Stephen? All I'm saying is, all I'm saying is that there's something that is just listening to you, and this is a room full of people who are writers, who want to be writers. You've got to, there's some kind of story that you have to tell, but also just a rhythm in your life that is going to reveal itself to you in your work as you get to know each other, get to know yourselves better.
God, that's exactly what I was going to say to something Winnie said. I'm so happy you brought this up, because you were talking about how you like movies that aren't predictable, basically. You're saying, and I do a kind of political thing that's personal also. And I have this saying I always say, you know, like Lyndon Johnson said, all politics are local. And I say, not only are all politics local, all politics are personal. And I was going to say that that's true for me, you know, but it's not true for everyone. And it's and it comes out of something that I can't explain. If you're me, it makes perfect sense. And yet I've been trying to do recently, a very broad adventure. I love adventure films, you know, like Lawrence of Arabia or Indiana Jones. Everyone does. And for 10 years, I've been trying to do it. And I'm now right in the middle of it, you know? And I had this great, broad, hugely, everyone from 8 years old to 80 would get it and love it story. And I started writing it. And sure enough, I have veered down a fucking rabbit hole. And everything that was entertaining, everything that was like accessible, moving, thrilling, adventurous, has been subsumed by these insane characters who aren't even part of the movie. Like, it's just crazy, you know, because that's who I am. And so it's going to say to you that whoever you are, you know, that's the job. Like, what she's saying is like listening to what's inside of you and being really clear, you know. If you're me, then don't try to do this other thing. If you're you, try to find out what the thing you do is, and then uncover it. I lucked out.
Well, your true nature will reveal itself if you let it. And just even the story that he told earlier about, God, I forget who it was that said to you, just don't care about any of that stuff you think you're supposed to care about. And the only time I've personally ever had any success at what I've done is when there's been something that somehow or other gotten on the page that is as close to me as it can be without being me. I'm not Romy and Michelle. I went to college. I'm articulate. I'm ambitious, but I understand how it feels. I know what it feels like to want to impress people. Every time I write, my theme that keeps coming up again and again and again is the belief that if you got something or your life went a certain way, that you would be happy. And I'm just obsessed with that. I mean, I hope I get to write about something else at some point, but who you are, your voice, your nature, what irks you, what gets under your skin will reveal itself, and that's...
Let me give you a great example of what she's saying, exactly, because I was it's exactly what I was going to... Different light. But anyway, but let me just, because it actually plays, the two roads meet somewhere. I'm in the Pentagon, I'm walking down this hall, it's shiny, there are military people walking by, it's Tuesday, 11 a.m., click, 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 I go, there's a little sign, counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, I'm here. I walk in, there's like one person, and in another room, there's another guy. How I got to that guy is through a journalist who covers the Pentagon beat. And he talked to me, and he said, you know, there's a guy who's kind of smart, you might like go talk to him. This is what takes me to this office. I'm in there, and I'm listening to him, and he's really smart. And he's just giving me that same song and dance I've heard from the drug czar's office. You know, remember, this is your brain on drugs. Shh. I'm just like, guys. They're like, but we're not going to do it that way anymore because that wasn't hip. Now it's going to be hip. I'm like, good fucking luck. That one.
Just say no.
It's going to be hip. Just an idea. Actually, drugs feel good. Start there. Okay. Anyway, so I'm at the Pentagon. And this guy says all this thing, and I go, look, I listen, and finally, and I'm just listening, you know, I'm listening. And I go, I'm like, all right. 60% of the drugs that come into this country come across the border with Mexico. It's not that big of a border. They don't come shoved up the ass of some mule. They come in semis. We all know it. Okay. Now, the guy just pauses for a second. And he goes, I have 3 fucking graduate degrees. I have 2 fucking doctorates. I have 2 kids in the fucking Virginia suburbs. I have a mortgage. I want a second home. It's not like I'm gonna leave here and go fucking lobby for the soybean industry like I've been working at the agriculture department. I don't know what the fuck to do. I've been here for 8 years. I do nothing. Maybe it goes to 70%. I spend 8 years of my life and maybe I get it to 50%. What the fuck do you want me to do? I'm like, dude, that's my whole life. You know, I just get that. I get that. it just feels heartbreaking and sad and true, you know? This guy has his heart, he's a good man, and he just didn't know how to get it done. It's an insoluble problem. He's barking up the wrong tree, and he's 8 years in, man. He's up the river with Kurt's 8 years. I'm just some smartass from Hollywood going, you're really funny about that drug thing, you know, like, it's working.
Such a parallel between that guy and you when you were knee deep in the big muddy of your traffic script, having to say to Soderbergh, I just don't have it. I just don't even know where it would be if I could have it. That is unbelievable parallel, I think.
It's just exactly what you're saying. Like, I'm just, I happen to be wired for that, whatever that is. I don't even know. I can't articulate. I have no idea what it is that I do. I can talk about craft specifically, transitions, and subtext. I understand that stuff later. It's very hard to understand it up front. It's hard to do it. It's hard to call your shot, like Ruth, and go, now I'm gonna write subtext. I'd be like, I have no idea. Like when you explain subtext, I was like, oh yeah, that's subtext. I got to do that. That's a good example, And
well, we can agree that we all always get amnesia every day, and we don't remember what we remember.
Well, it's why ultimately all the classes about structure are only useful to a certain point, because the process itself is so mysterious. And again, it's one of the reasons why Winnie and I like to do the class, and it really came out of conversations that we would have, almost like kind of like a drug deal, where it was this shameful thing where it's like,
I can't write.
I don't know what I'm doing. Fuck, will you help me? And
I can't do it anymore.
I wake up and I don't do it. We started something called Writers Camp, where she would come over to my house so that we would write, and then it turned into shopping camp and lunch camp. But
it would seem to be fun. But
wait, you said something great. Okay, I just want to talk about it. Structure classes, structure books, structure classes. Tolstoy versus Robert McKee. Round one. I've talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating. It's really important to me. In between writing War and Peace and Anna Karenina, Tolstoy kept a journal. He wrote in it, I figured out the 4 techniques you have to master in order to write a great novel. Amazing. Tolstoy. The guy's a good writer. You're like, what is it? Oh my God, the keys to the kingdom. He ranks them in order of importance. The 4 techniques you have to master to write a great novel, according to Tolstoy. Number 1. What is it?
No shopping.
Transitions, number 1.
Wow.
Great. Robert McKee would say structure. Story structure. What's your story? Tolstoy would say, what are your transitions? Number 2.
Characters? No?
Context.
Oh, context, yeah.
I think context is the unsung hero of drama.
But that's also what Stephen's been talking about his, wayward youth being the context for him writing Traffic.
Yeah, but that's a different idea, actually, because it's what he's really saying is what he's really trying to say is how you create a realistic backdrop, and obviously drawing on your own experience in this case. But Tolstoy didn't fight Napoleon, Oh, it's how you create a realistic backdrop against which your action's going to happen.
Right.
Or a non-realistic backdrop, a backdrop. In other words, transitions in his mind really the rhythm, the energy of the piece. It had like a musical feeling to him. Or, it was very simple. And then, because it's a novel, then context was like, what is my backdrop, And I want to really know that I know that. And that's why...
That's why you do your research.
Well, and it's why you do your research, and it's why when Tolstoy gives you an image, a simple sentence of something, it's really beautiful, and it's really true, and it's really powerful, and it's exactly right. It's not, he could have described that tree 1,000 ways, and he picked the way that is that tree. And that tree that's in the background, you know that tree. You know what it looks like. And it gives this quiet, underground authority to everything that happens in the foreground. Okay, this is Tolstoy again, just it's not Robert McKee. And finally, so Okay, transitions, context. Third on the list, character. So after you have these first two things, now you can think about your characters. Now, he hasn't mentioned, he's 75% of the way through his novel. He hasn't even talked about story yet. Now, to my mind, when I read this in a biography of Tolstoy by Henri Troyat, great French biographer, did Alexander the Great, did Turgenev. This Tolstoy biography is like the great missing Tolstoy novel. But anyway, so he puts Now Last story. And I really thought about this at length, and I came up with a theory. And it's kind of a crackpot theory. Feel free to disagree, shoot holes in it. But my feeling is that when you start with story structure, you have headed down an inescapably derivative path. Sometimes it's useful to have that derivation because it will simply move you forward to the next point. And sometimes you need that because it's easy to get lost. But the path is inescapably derivative. And it's those things where you go, there's 7 stories, there's this, there's that, boy meets girl. What is it? What's your story? Is it the hero's journey? You know, look, there's truth in all of that. And a lot of stories radiate off those things, but they're not stories I like. You know, I watched the first hour of 8½the other night, you know, and I'm like, I'm really thinking about it. And I definitely feel that point where you realize you've flashed back and you've had dream sequences. It's like 50 minutes in, and until the wife shows up and you really have a love triangle, you feel a lag. You feel the plot, the engine of story structure let you down, and you drift, and you feel it. I personally happen to love that drift. And I had a very fascinating conversation one day. Actually, I didn't talk at all. I sat at Harris Savides, you know, the cinematographer, great cinematographer. I sat at his feet. I love the movie Elephant, and I couldn't figure out how they shot it and why they made these choices. And I was just like, I sat with him, and he said this beautiful thing. He said, cinema's too didactic. You know, it's the biggest. That's what's happened. It's didactic. It's crazy. You need to have the quiet space where people are allowed to bring their interior life to the process. The audience has to be allowed to bring their inner life, and that's what makes it come alive. And if you dictate everything, if you get ahead of it, if you know what's coming, if you're on that derivative path, it is inescapable if that's what you're thinking about first. You'll never escape it. It's a trap of derivation because it's so freaking hard. And so when you hit a dead end, you get to loggerheads, you're just like, I know, I'll put the hero in danger. It's the hero's journey. He's got to triumph. He's going to have 3 things he's not going to triumph over, and then he's going to triumph. I know exactly how it's going to work. Oh, you know what? The boy's met the girl. He's going to lose her now. And then he's going to get her. I know how to do it. I know exactly how to do it. That's happened to me.
Well, you know, and I'll give you.
You didn't do the 4th one.
Oh shit.
Okay, no, I'm doing, but it's story, and so.
Oh, story.
So,
story.
but I am doing it, but I want to just be. I want to. But no, I want to be really clear about it, because I was actually, this is the thing I was thinking about before I came over, because this is the eternal, and we were talking about it a little bit in the break. This is the eternal problem for screenwriters, particularly screenwriters that work in Hollywood, where things cost a lot of money. It's I know that when you don't have a roadmap like Tolstoy, and you just go, I want a cool transition, awesome context, great character, and then go. I can write something cool and interesting, and it has life. Often it's the wrong scene. It's not advancing a story that you can understand. It's real and true, but it's not the right scene. And for me, I've done this a long time now, the thing I constantly ask myself is, kill your babies. You know, this is a great scene, but is it causing the problem 5 scenes later? Because it has so much life, but it's not the right scene. And it's to come back towards McKee to say, all right, you know, story is important, and these things have to have an ineluctable movement forward. But if I can encourage you to do anything, start with life. Start with life, right? 5 scenes that have nothing to do with each other, but have life. 5. And then step back and look at them, and I guarantee you a story will emerge. I guarantee it. I promise. I would say that the reason we've steered away from an idea like anatomy is that organically reductionary like story. It's a very dangerous way to think about it. In that I'm saying something that I believe and I've arrived at, and there are total exceptions to this. And there are writers who work completely the opposite, and they tell beautiful stories. Gary Ross, big. He works the exact opposite way. You know, he knows his story, he's going to tell it, and he brings this incredible life to it. I find, just for me, it's very hard to do that. So I've developed a theory that backs up the other way I do it, and then I found Tolstoy seeming to back it up, and I've now bent him into my service. He's in his grave rolling over going, that's not what I meant. It's idiotic. It's not even me. I didn't. Anyway, but I think there's a real truth here, which is that most scripts and things I read don't. The problem isn't they're too full of life and they're too original, and they grab me and the characters are people I want to live with. That's rarely the problem. The problem is that I've seen it before. I've read it before. I'm bored by the third sentence. By the second page, I know it doesn't work. That's my problem. And so I've tried to avoid that. And you know, the way to do it, in my opinion, is to not be hemmed in by expectations. Because we live in a town, you know, we work in a business that has two, not one, but two daily onanistic masturbatory magazines covering everything that happens. I mean, I call the journal Schadenfreude, you know? It's like, imagine like, I have a friend who's a director, and he's like, he lives in London. He goes, I'm feeling really good. I just had a movie that made $700 million. I'm staying at the Chateau Marmont. I get out to, I have my breakfast in my room. I get in the elevator, and there it's staring at me. Some guy has got this job that I wasn't offered. Why wasn't I offered it? What am I doing? And I feel like we breathe this in, this air of like, it has to be like this. This is what's selling. This is what made money last weekend. And you empower this internal editor who is going to crush the life out of your work before it ever gets a chance to have a life. It will be stillborn. And it's a passion for me, because I honestly think it's a great art form. I didn't when I came out here. I've been lucky, you know. It started with Michael Tolkien saying, no, this is really funny. We are really amusing ourselves. This is good. This should be in the movie. And I was like, but we wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And eventually the story, you know, if you can string together 25 of these scenes that have so much life and joy and they feel funny and original and true and all this stuff, the story will come out of that. I guarantee it. And that's not that the other process doesn't work beautifully for some people.
It's just, but then you really have to live with the uncertainty and the confusion and just the discomfort of having all this stuff and not knowing, is it going to turn into anything, and how, you know, is this, you know.
You have to have an enormous tolerance for pain, because when you know for a fact, you're like, you know, I'm trying to think of what it would be like.
Well, it's like, I mean, it's not like this, but I mean, when you were saying this thing about how you lived with this single thought for 2 years, like you would wake up and go, how the fuck am I going to structure this movie for 2 years? Like I thought about my movie for 2 years, and then I got taken off my movie, you know, and that loss, or that death, or whatever you want to call it, you know, is you know, it's pain. There's no other way to put it. It's pain. There's a certain amount of pain. But in order to live that life, what I have learned personally is I've learned, okay, you know what? I'm actually really glad I wrote that movie. I actually did sort of the best that I could what you were talking about. I actually wrote the movie I was interested to write. I actually struggled with that and got there. So it was like I was able to kind of go say to myself, okay, you know what? I did that. I know that it changed me in some way, and I'm going to let that be enough for today. And I guess, actually, you know, it's interesting. I mean, not to respond too much to your question. I don't mean to sound like I'm defending myself at all. But anatomy of a script, that's just like even get to meet them, or you meet somebody that is somebody like them. But it's inevitable that the writer's life is fired by, you know, it's the part of the engine of it is that you encounter other writers, and those people inspire you, and they actually change you. And so we wanted to just have those kind of conversations in front of other people, in front of other writers, so that we could talk about what it's actually like to live that life. It might almost more properly be called the writer life.
Man with the blue envelope. You asked to give you an anatomizing version of it. No. I'm gonna give you a very specific example though. Because you asked about note cards and things like that. Often I come up with a storyline that I know is, like, whenever I have an outline, I joke and I say, well, now I've eliminated one possibility. And that's not healthy. But, because I throw out good stuff a lot of times. But I'll come up with a general outline. I'll know how it's going to happen. Sometimes I do things like, on this thing I've been working on, I'm like, it's a kidnap movie. No, it's a treasure hunt movie. No, it's a buddy comedy. No, and it's just out of despair and being lost, but it keeps me going, because I'm like, it's not what it's going to be. It's turning into the same thing all my crap turns into. I don't know what it's about, but I know there'll be a man with a blue envelope who's going to solve it. And what this is that in every complicated thing I've ever worked on, I'm there with studio executives who, very well-meaning, are confused. They're just confused. They don't understand. It doesn't matter what you say. It could be the clearest thing on earth. They're confused. And inevitably, I solve it with a man with a blue envelope, which is ding dong. The door opens. There's a man standing there. Often he looks like Steven Soderbergh. He's holding a blue envelope. And in the blue envelope is the answer to the thing that you're confused about. We never open it, ever. And it's always cut from the movie. But I shot it in SYRIANA. I have a man with a blue envelope. It looks just like Soderbergh. He opens the door, ding dong, hands the thing to Jeffrey Wright, explains the whole movie. It's not in the movie. But I used it to get past that point. And that point was, the story was like I perceived this world to be. And that world was really oblique and murky and weird. The war on drugs is not clear. It's that despair. The world of oil and foreign policy. It's a man with a blue envelope.
But that's what I was, you know, the general observation I was making about Stephen. But I wanted to say one other thing for those of you who've signed up for this class, because if you want something different than this, you're going to be sadly disappointed. What this class is it's like screenwriting. It really is. Winnie and I watch the movies or whatever. We write down questions, we talk with each other, and then we come in here not knowing how it's going to go. You know, we write up questions and then we never ask them, but we feel better having the questions. And then something organic happens, and we're seeing what's going to happen. We're interacting with you guys, and sometimes we're going to get to the stuff you're interested in earlier. But it took me as long as it took me listening to Stephen to go, oh, that's what his whole life is. His whole life is this experience of this gray area and wanting to get rid of all the drugs and plug up the borders, but you can't. And so it's just like writing.
I knew how to get rid of the drugs.
Yeah. Have a big party at Stephen's house.
No.
I was going to hoover them all up.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying, guys.
For the rest of you.
It's all, you know, when we start getting into these conversations, everything is just like a mirror and a mirror and a mirror, and everything's a metaphor for something else, and your life is your work, and the work is how this class unfolds. And this is how my mind works, and his mind and her mind.
I'm very superstitious about it too, you know, like even coming in to talk about it, I worry, you know, that you talk about something you're working on, a thing I know for a fact, you let the fizz out of the bottle. You just do. And I'm pathetic, and I get insecure, and I was back there in the kitchen, and I was talking a little bit like, oh, I love this, because all writers are insecure. I'm like, I'm not insecure. You know, anytime anyone says that, you can be sure they're insecure. But so I'll go out at night, and I'll, like, you know, sometimes I'll sing for my supper, you know. I'll just start talking about what I'm doing because I don't feel like it has any validity. It just doesn't feel real. You know, I've suffered with it and it's never going to work. And so there I am at some dinner party, wowing the lawyer from Orange County. And he's just going like, could somebody get me away from this guy? He's scaring me. And it's just, you know, but the thing I also know, and I really feel strongly about this, and when Robin called, and I know Winnie, and I really admire these guys, you know, it's like anybody that does something that I think is great, you only have to do it once. You only have to do one great thing once.
Thank God.
It's so hard to do. I always say, like, you know, if you can do 2 great things, like, you're in the all-time Hall of Fame. It's that hard. If you just do one great thing, you're great. You know, it's like, it's like, it's so hard. I don't know how people do it or how it happens, and there's so much luck and faith and all this crap. But I was really lucky. You know, I was the beneficiary of getting to sit at Tolkien's feet when he was patient. I must have given him something. I have the slightest idea what it was for like a year. I think I just amused him and made him feel less lonely, you know, because he was a great writer, so smart. I got to do that one script with Milch, and Milch is a natural-born teacher. You know, he taught at Yale and all that stuff, and he has this kind of thing. But mainly what he had was just gut-wrenching disdain for my work, which I found offensive. So it made me angry, and I wanted to get better. But those are like mentors, you know, and I lucked out. I just lucked out. And I just always think, I'm like, you can't teach someone to do it per se. Like, but like for instance, there's a guy here, John, who I run into, and he had gotten me, he got a script to me. And, you know, odds. It was total luck, by the way. Yeah, it's like a luck, fluky thing, right? And for a long time, I didn't have time to read it because I have a stack of stuff that's like, you know, a huge stack we all do on our desk, you know, and you always want to help. Like, my intentions are always good, but you know, a long time goes by. And then I read it, and I was like, oh, fuck, this is actually pretty good. God damn it. Oh, I can't believe this. I have to really take this seriously. So I started thinking about it, and I edited it, you know, and I was like, I sat down with him, we had lunch, and the main thing I said to him, and I would say to anybody, really, is like, one, he got me a script, which is kind of cool. Like, how do you manage that? Because I'm like, I try to avoid everybody. Then, it's pretty good. And then, I was like, you know, I asked him like some basic questions. I was like, you know, could you modernize and set this in like today, because it's set in the past and in a different place? And I was like, you were very vivid. Could you, you know, recontextualize this, you know? Could you do this? Could you do that? They're just very practical questions. I showed him transitions. I did a transition pass on his script for him. I cut in later, started earlier, you know, gave it to him. I said, look, this is what I'm going to do. It's the same stuff I'm saying tonight. And I believe that stuff really deeply. And it's not fairy dust. You know, it's like kind of just hard labor on some level. And you have to have fairy dust, but you're not always going to have it. You know, I've had just such a long run with no fairy dust. I'm like, are there any fairies here? So, you know, but anyway, and so I feel like what you guys are saying, this class, I didn't know what the class was about. I had no idea.
We don't describe it to people because we don't have.
You don't want to be reduced to something.
Yeah,
but
it is a horrible title.
You know.
But anyway, it's
It is. It's a horrible title.
It's not a good title.
Anybody can
and
think of it.
And the truth is,
a good, better title.
Any questions? Anybody want?
Yeah, more questions.
This guy
yes.
had a question.
I think there are a few of us who were here last year, and something that you're addressing about, is it anatomy of script or not, but I think what's so amazing to sit here and to listen to writers and how they struggle, so it validates my struggle. I mean, you guys have Emmys, Tonys, etc., and yet you're sitting there not knowing what you're doing. So it gives me the courage to say, you know, these people don't always know what they're doing, so just the fact that maybe today I didn't know what I was doing, I mean, so it gives you a community of lost people. Anyway, so that's very helpful and hard.
We always said it was like a 12-step meeting where it's like, my name is Robin and I'm a writer.
I'm so sorry.
So that to me is more the essence of what you're offering to us. But it was so interesting listening to you, and you know, I love that moment where you said, "Oh my God, this really is an art form," and you had a more conventional concept of it, and it sort of awakened your passion for the possibilities of this art form. Would you mind just talking about that a little bit?
Well, it's it's a lot what Robin was already touching on a little bit. Is just how when you see the personal, reflected back at you off the page. I had like in Traffic, for instance, I had to write these scenes where this girl was smoking crack in the bathroom, and in the middle of writing one of those scenes, I had a seizure. I literally fell out of my chair shaking, like all the electrical wiring in my body went wrong, and it was really unpleasant and ugly and sad. But in hindsight, I think I was doing a decent job of dramatizing that experience, because I knew it very well. And honesty, someone at the break asked me why I made that a girl, why I made it a girl. The reason I made her a girl is because it's an art form. It's because I didn't have the self-honesty, and I still don't usually, to put that level of truth on the page in a way that could be mistaken for me. It's too terrifying. I wrote 3 movies in a row that had female protagonists. I couldn't get close to it. I didn't know that. When I first came to Hollywood, I thought, I'm ready to write for The Simpsons and make that big TV overall deal. Where's mine, That's kind of how I looked at it. I didn't understand it. I was a fiction writer, And slowly, by not giving up, I got myself in a position where I had to face something that was really true to me, to my nature. And I'm an addict. I could go head to head with obsessive, addictive personality with anybody on planet Earth. I didn't understand it that well, I still don't really, but a lot of it's really ugly, and it's taken me to really ugly places. Did I want to put that down? Nobody knew when they were getting me to do this. Ed Zwick didn't know I had a drug problem. Steven Soderbergh didn't know. Nobody knew.
That's subtext, man, right there.
But I
to sit in a room writing a movie about the drug war, knowing that you were an addict, and the people you're in the room with don't know you're an addict. Wow.
And then
that is the movie on some weird level.
And so I was saying that in SYRIANA, and it's a shame, but I'm nearly positive that SYRIANA is a significantly better script than Traffic. It just, in its entirety, the way it operates is very nuanced, and yet there was a long period where I was very lost. And you have to have real stomach for being lost, because I'm usually lost until very close to the end. The last pass for me, that last thing, so many things chunk into place. Tiny adjustment to this, drop that, add a new scene. Things that took me months and years to do, suddenly it just has crystal clarity. It's the last 5 yards.
I'm like that. It's a horrible way of life, I've got to say.
It's horrible because you're sustaining this chaos and this feeling of being lost.
It's scary.
It's a feeling of death. You're living with this horrible feeling for a long period of time.
You're like that too, a little bit, right?
Well, I'm totally like it. I mean, Romy and Michelle was a movie with no plot virtually, and it was just these characters, and I didn't know what it was, and then you'll get these connections, but they're really elusive. It's like a mirage, and I just think that that's what we're signing on for. But again, tonight I keep making the macro and the micro, but in the last couple years, I've started reading more and more Buddhism and just things like that, and you're just going, it's that again, that's writing. It's like we want to believe we're in control of something. We want to believe that that things are just going to go this way, and that we can do The Secret and get everything we want, but that's just not the way it works. And we don't want to think about that terror of not knowing really what's going to happen in our own lives.
And the question is, great, that's exactly, she's just made the point. Do a movie about the terror of not knowing what's going to happen in your life. Like why you reach for Buddhism. She just hit it. That that goes in the red zone. Ding, ding, ding. What I was going to say about SYRIANA, and again, this is like, you really want to know, like, why is it an art form? How do you transmogrify that thing you're most terrified of that you can't face? I mean, I don't know how, I'm drawn to the idea of creating a TV show if I could do something that had great characters, and it was really personal. And then it's like a novel. You can explore it, and you can really dig down and get into it, like Winnie did. You can really look, and it is amazing, and you live with it. And that it appeals to me on this incredible level, because once I'm in, and it's so hard to get in. And so it's a fantasy I have. But SYRIANA lost again. Why? I'm skittering on the surface. I'm not telling the truth. Things are happening, but they're not connected to me. They're just not. And I was explaining this in the break, that I had written an email to a woman who's a really good writer. And I said, God, this thing I'm on like page, I'm in the 60s, it's just crap, you know, it's just crap. It's not working. It's just like, and in that same email, I had told her this story. I had split up with the mother of my 2 children. We had split up. We were never married, but we'd split up, and she just left. So now I have 2 babies in diapers, and I'm hanging out in this house, and it's like 3 a.m., and my son is bawling, screaming down the hall. And I wake up, and I'm like, in my mind, I'm going, oh my God, what have I done to these children? What's going to happen to them? I'm just, you know, oh my God, what's going on? And I went down the hall, and I opened the door to his room. And as I walked in, he just stopped crying, stood up on the edge of his crib, and held it, and goes, Daddy, I want to look out the window. and I picked him up, and I call him Bear. I'm like, okay, Bear, you know, I'll pick you up. And I have him like this, just like here, like my little papoose, and I walk over and I throw open the curtains, and there's this incredible street light down the way, this view, and we just stood there in the window. You know, my son, who was probably 18 or 2 maybe, no, he's maybe 3, almost 3, something like that. And we just looked out the window, the 2 of us, for about an hour, and it was really moving. And I wrote that to my friend, and then I complained about how my movie stunk. And she wrote me back, and she said, you know, that's what your movie's about. That's what your movie's about. And sure enough, that is what my movie's about. Not only is it, I mean, that scene is in the movie with Matt Damon with his kid, and he calls him Bear, he takes him to the window, it's raining, it's in Geneva, they just stand there, look out the window, he's destroying his life, he's destroyed his marriage. What's the cost of his ambition? You know, what is the cost of his ambition? You know, my ambition has had enormous costs, or something, I don't know, I don't understand it. But as I do this more and more and more, I know, oh boy, now I'm in the zone where I can't turn away.
And again,
I think
I'm literally sitting here nearly crying from that story. And you see the difference. It's like when you go into that place, it's just unbelievable, but it really takes a lot of courage.
It's time, too. You have to get lucky, you know. I was so lucky this person pointed that out to me. I could have missed it. And every story in that movie is about fathers and sons, all of it, period, you know, I mean, for whatever reason. And I was working on this new thing, you know, I wrote Blink. Blink is about, lo and behold, fathers and sons. And I was complaining to a friend of mine who is a terrific writer, he's a journalist, and writes for the New Yorker, and he was like, oh, that's a problem. You know, you actually have a subject. Well, I feel so sorry for you. I was like, you know, but I think the art form holds so much more, you know, than I think on a normal day, and I prove it to myself many, many times. I prove it by going back and watching scenes in movies that I love, and how I've misremembered them or misunderstood what they were actually about.
Wow.
Is so shocking.
That's good.
You pointed out the film Z. I've seen Z 50 times.
Do you guys know about the movie Z?
Costa
Have you seen it?
Gavras.
Because when we were preparing for this, I'm sitting here going, no one does the kind of movies that Stephen does. I mean, they just don't do them. And I remembered it blew my mind when I saw Z. So I go on Wikipedia for the 80th time that day, and it talked about how Costa Gavras did these movies that were political and commercial, and I thought that's really what he does.
Z though is so amazing because it's the thing is, if you know how it works, is at the very end you see this Z drawn in this parking lot outside the window, and this whole thing has been pushing to this moment, and there's just it's like a cacophony of what's happening, and I just I wanted that cross-cutting energy in SYRIANA, and I didn't quite know how to get it, and I have carpeting, sort of like this carpeting in my living room. I live in this shack that's falling into the ocean, actually at the top floor of a 2-floor shack, and I had note cards where I had outlined the ending, like 80 beats, because it's cross-cutting very fast, maybe 80 or 100 possibility, details that are going to be cross-cut in a certain way. And I thought I had it, because I'd done it, and then I realized it didn't work, and then I spent 3 weeks on my knees moving those cards around. 3 weeks. I had like oatmeal marks in my knees from walking around, my hands permanently just on my floor, on my knees, moving cards. 3 weeks, thought I had it. Did another 3 weeks, and then finally, in an enormous burst, I did 6 more weeks on the floor with those cards. 6 more, it's insane. And then I had it. I had it. I knew it. I knew how to do it. And, but it didn't feel good.
But it's also another thing that winds up in his movies, obsession. That single-minded thing when you're sticking with something against all odds. And that's what comes out of his movies. Let's take some more questions.
This gentleman in the front row had a question. Yeah, you.
Okay, great. Hey, this is, goes to the whole transitions and back to character. Did you start off with X amount of storylines in Traffic? Did you think, okay, I'm going to tell 4 stories here, I'm going to tell 10 stories, and then it winnowed down to something? And then the second part of that is there's such a cadence that develops, and especially towards the end of the second act, then carries all the way through. It almost feels like every sequence is the same amount of time. Was that sort of part of the process where you went back through at the end and said, okay, let's make this 1 page, then let's make this 1 page, and pull that scene in?
Those are good, interesting questions. Start with the last part. With Traffic, Steven Soderbergh started out as an editor, and he is an editor. He's a great editor. He still edits. He edits all sorts of things. He is tremendous at it. And so he brought an enormous amount of wisdom about how a film like this could work. I brought, I think, certain life and passion and stories and characters and things, and he had a real guiding hand. Those 2 days we spent in the hotel room, we brought that script up so much, pairing and moving and shaping, and he really had a sense of how to do it, which I think is special, and comes from, Traffic was his 10th film, and he had, had a good idea of how that sort of thing could work in the editing room. So what you're seeing when you're watching the film is not only the beneficiary of like my 50 or 100 drafts, and then that time we spent together, pre-production, then also what happens during shooting. I had a scene I was incredibly passionate about where the drug czar was going to try crack to understand what was going on with his daughter. And I know this, it felt very true to me because my mom tried marijuana when I was in high school, and she's a devout, goes to church, and she's not a drug user, drinks, but she tried it. Later she told me, because she didn't understand why I was such a pothead. She just couldn't figure it out. And I thought, this is really, I could believe this. And I mean, Christ, also, just think, the drug czar smoking crack. I'm like, yeah, it's so punk, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I fought for it, and Steven's like, I just don't know, man, I don't know. And then I'm in Ohio, and we're shooting this, because we couldn't set it in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from, because weirdly, the bad part of town in Cincinnati looks better, just visually. But I was there, and I watched Michael Douglas, and he was going to do it. Like Soderbergh he was just like, he's like sort of, I think he just felt, I'm going to give you this one, Gaghan. You know what? I'll give you it. Go for it. And I was there watching, and I realized Michael Douglas's performance was so good, I thought, and like he was so wrapped up in something that wasn't, he's going to be the drug czar. This guy's not going to smoke crack. Like, I just was looking at him like, it's just not true. He's going to look at it. He's going to think about it. He doesn't understand it, but he's so torn up about his daughter. He's not going to mitigate it at that moment by doing this frivolous thing. And I went to Stephen and I said, he can't do it. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. I must have argued 1,000 times about this. And he just looked at me and he goes, okay, moving on. And, you know, and so you can't underestimate the value. Like I've been looking a lot at Lawrence of Arabia. I've become a real expert in Lawrence of Arabia recently. I have a 3-sheet of it in my office that I always sit in front of. I love it, but I didn't really understand it. I loved it. I watched it with my son, who's now 8, the other night. And he was so beautiful. What he said. Oh my God. He goes, his sister's fallen asleep face down on the carpet. She's got that oatmeal thing on her face. She's just sound asleep, and he's watching. He looks at me at one point, and he goes, Daddy, I love this. I love this movie. I don't love it quite as much as Hidden Fortress, but it's definitely my second favorite film, ahead of Iron Giant. And I was like, and sometimes in cinema, if you know, I think all of us probably like films, and we're students of films on some level, and I've become a real student of film late. You know, I wasn't like a Tarantino or something studying it in people who are so passionate they go to film school. It wasn't me. You know, I was like writing poems and like, you know, wandering around New York. Like Bolt and David Lean had this unbelievable collaboration. Bolt operated on the back of a script by Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson broke the structure. He broke the structure of Lawrence of Arabia. He came up with the idea of starting with the funeral. And people are walking around going, did you know Lawrence? Oh, he's an amazing man. Have you ever met him? No, I haven't actually met him. Oh, I had the pleasure of almost encountering him. I saw him once in Cairo. You know, that was Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson didn't get credit until much later, until there was a credit arbitration system. He was awarded credit later. He was tagged on with Robert Bolt. Wow, the great Robert Bolt. There's like a Bolt Award and all this stuff. And Bolt, in his letters to Michael Wilson, said, you know, I broke my back on this. I've done 5 back-breaking drafts for Lean. Just every scene has been reworked and reworked. You know, that's how you end up with something that good, because you had a guy like Lean firing at the top of his game, Bolt firing at the top of his game, and Michael Wilson, who had the brilliant structure that would allow that story to be told, and he deserves credit. And so that's all this stuff that's happening that you don't know about. So you watch a movie from the outside like Traffic, and you think, oh, that Gaghan, boy, he sat down and really had it. You know, no. You know, I was the beneficiary of the guy who wrote Sex, Lies, and Videotape, who's also probably, I could make maybe the best editor alive of film cutting, but he's up there. And so he's helping me with my script. And I also was, you know, really passionate, like that letter I read, you guys. You know, I really knew what I was doing on this story for whatever reason. So all that's happening in terms of the crafting. Then you sit in the editing room, and he's adjusting the pacing. And that first day that I saw that screening of that movie, of Traffic, and he invited me to an early screening, he'd showed it to other people, he'd made adjustments, and he invited me. There were like maybe 30 people there, friends and family screening. And he was nervous, you know, because, you know, he didn't know was I going to yell at him? What was going to happen? Thing ended, I shot up out of my seat. I couldn't control it. I ran towards him. I think he was like, oh God, he's got a gun. It's Valerie Solanas. He's going to fucking kill me. And I just like hugged him. And I just said, this is the happiest day of my life. It's the happiest day of my life. You made everything better. Everything. Everything. And he did. And I was just like, you know, wow. I got so lucky. Where the fuck was he on SYRIANA? No, I'm kidding. No, he helped me on, you know, he produced SYRIANA, and he really helped me with it. But SYRIANA, and this is a natural segue, went, I believe, out beyond our capabilities. The conception on the page with 5 storylines as opposed to 3 it goes from like 1 storyline to 2 storylines, gets a little bit more difficult. 2 storylines to 3 storylines, a little bit more difficult. Something happens between 3 stories and 4 storylines, it goes to tenfold. You add a 5th, breaks the camel's back. Doesn't matter. It could be the simplest stories in the world. You're going to sit there with an audience, and they're going to go, and in fact, honestly, I'm watching it, and I'm going, what the hell is going on? I mean, I love it. I love it. I got that image. Look at that. I don't know what's going on. Oh my God, I don't know what's going on. And
that's such a relief to me.
but in a good way. And
I was really overwhelmed by that.
Well, it was supposed to, by the way, and it was designed with a very specific conception, which was, you're going to be more confused than you've ever been in any movie in your life. 45 minutes in, you're going to want to quit and leave. You're going to think these people are inscrutable. They're nothing like me. I don't understand this. And then, bit by bit, it was going to reel you in. You're going to see, oh my God, wait a second. Maybe. But I would say, you know, when we were like on Traffic, Stephen said, well, you know, it's great because you if you have Catherine Zeta-Jones, you have Michael Douglas, you have Benicio, their faces you're going to really recognize, and they're going to help orient you. And you really need to have people that are going to orient you, you know. So, like for instance, just by nature of the beast in SYRIANA, when you have like Clooney and Jeffrey Wright and Matt Damon, and you can rank those in whatever order you want, the audience attention is going to focus in this kind of descending. And like at the end, when you start going to the other storylines, there's just nothing left. And I don't know if the flaw ultimately is I tilted too much to character. If this story in particular, you know, the things I resisted in Traffic were some of the conventional elements, like, oh, it's just a cop chasing a drug dealer. Oh, she's Mata Hari? Give me a break. I don't buy it. You know? So I fought those things. And the storyline that I completely invented with Stephen, and you know what, it was the Benicio story, and I think that's, you know, really successful, and it's
well,
very nuanced.
It felt like the real
it's very
heart of the movie.
Right. It's very kind of has this thing. You know, SYRIANA, it's like you look back and you think, God, you know, there were a lot of periods in post where I was just like, man, what I wouldn't give for a cop chasing, you know, a bad guy, just to help orient people. And so I don't know precisely what the answer is. I think you have an instinct about how to balance them, you know, the more you work on them. And I think that, you know, beware anything that has, you know, 5. You see it in TV also, where you have an A, B, C, or D, and you're servicing, you know, by the time you get down to C, like the D story might have 3 beats or 2 beats even, and it's just,
But again, in TV, unless you're really servicing the star, because it's more of a novel than a short story, you can have one episode that's really, you know, has this character that's doesn't have much of a story. I mean, it's...
I was always blown away structurally by Seinfeld. I mean, just blown away by it. And I had a period in my life where I was living in the basement of the executive producer of Seinfeld. He's a friend of mine. I was a little off the rails, and I would come up every once in a while, and I would watch Seinfeld with him. You know, and he's done it. He's executive producing it. He's definitely helped at least create it. And I would sit there like with, you know, a gin and tonic or a vodka, and I'm just like, by the middle of it, I'm just going, do you know how fucking great this is? Do you realize that? You know, they've just landing on instruments every episode, how they wove, they pitched like 40 perfect games. I have no idea how they did it. But
I'll tell you how they did it, and it goes back to what we're talking about. I was once in a writer's room with Larry David. It was a rewrite of this guy Alan Zweibel's pilot. You know, everybody gets a bunch of their friends to come in, and you're working for free, basically. And the story was a mess. And so at one point, there's just this thing that's like completely irrelevant where somebody comes in with a bagel, right? And Larry David's sitting there, and about 10 minutes later goes, what if the bagel flies in the air and hits the guy on the head and winds up on the finger, and you're just going, oh, I get it. That's how this guy's mind works. So the way that happens is that's what he sees. He just sees it. He will take the most random thing. I mean, it does feel true to life, and a lot of those stories feel like you're eavesdropping on Friends, but then he'll latch on to the weirdest thing. You know, I'm just thinking about the episode where the guy hits a golf ball and it goes into the whale's blowhole. And maybe it just started with the guy playing golf, and some other, you know, he comes across, you know, his wife was always trying to save the whales, you know, who knows. And then he sees the connection, but it's an extension of how his mind works.
And then bringing it off in 22 minutes, you know, that's the thing. We operate inside this, you know, framework, and it's, I think if you have an infinite amount of time, you know, well, you have an infinite amount of time, but in 22 minutes, anyway, and so I've really wrestled with this, and I have a real theory about it, which is when you outline a storyline, you know, eventually you have these characters and you know this world and things are happening, and then eventually I get like maybe 5 beats ahead. Like I kind of know, I sketch on a legal pad. I just have a pad next to me, and I'm going forward really fast, and I just make a line, and that's going to be a scene, and that's going to be a scene, that's going to be a scene, that's going to be a scene. That's 5 scenes on that storyline. If I'm really lucky, I'll go and do that exact same thing for all the other storylines. And so
you do that separately, or do you know how they're connected at that point?
You know, you've got this whole world alive and you know what's sort of going to happen, but I'm just in the practical terms of like the next 20 pages of the script, I've got, say, 4 or 5 times 5, and that's, say, 20 or 25 scenes. In a space, if you know 20 pages, is not going to hold 25 scenes. So you have to make these really hard choices, and that's how it starts. But where it gets to is, again, is negative space. It's just it's what Harris Savides says. What can you leave out? That not only is just, I don't have room for it, but what's that thing you can leave out strategically that you know why you've left it out? That's going to create the space that's going to bring the most powerful inner life experience of somebody to it. Where are they going to fill in? And so in the possibility of what you could leave out with if you have 5 scenes on 5 storylines, there are infinite number of possibilities that you could do that. But there is one answer, I think, that's usually most right. And it might be you drop 3 scenes from one, 2 from another, all of another, 1 scene from something, and it's always born out of transition. The transitions dictate.
But you may have to write all that. You know, if you guys are sitting here going, God, I gotta go home and I'm gonna sit down and write, and I'm gonna leave all the blank space.
I had 400 pages of good scenes for Blink that didn't make it into the movie.
Yeah, I mean, you're writing the scenes.
100 pages
and
of
then you're
shootable
looking
scenes.
at it and you're going,
400 pages.
I'm making the same point in 4 different scenes. I don't, you know, what part do you want to be set up? I was struggling with the pilot I'm working on and watching Traffic. I had this big revelation, which is I was setting everything up. You know what I mean? Like saying, this is where this guy is at, and then I realized, oh, I don't have to set that up. We can see the pretense, and then we can reveal something later on. But you don't know that. You know, you've got to go through all of those dead ends and write the scenes and then see, okay, there's 3 good lines in here, but it's overwritten, but then I also have this other scene, and it's just the process.
Friedkin said so many great things about this. Like back in like '97, I was working with him. I remember all these things he said because he was just great and yelling at me. But he would say, close up on a movie star is worth 1,000 scenic vistas, Gaghan, 1,000 scenic vistas. I don't care about your scenic vistas. The close up on the movie star is what's going to tell us. Okay, so I'm like, there's some truth to that. And he's going, it's shoe leather. It's shoe leather. They're just walking around. No one walks into a room and walks out of a room. It's fucking shoe leather, Gaghan. I'm like, boy, he's right. And I'm telling you, whole movie, if you get 2 entrances and 2 exits that make sense, I mean, you watch people directing a movie and you go direct your first movie, really pay attention. You're going to want people walking in and out because everybody's feeling all the emotion. We're all feeling it. No, we're not. You're feeling it. And what most people are feeling is, why are these people walking around? Where are they going? I don't understand. Shoe leather, it's the greatest, great example. He said to me, and this is about do directors want you to write? They don't want you to write bad descriptions. But one time Friedkin was just so frustrated with my inability to give him what he wanted. And he was just like, Bouvard and Pécuchet, Gaghan. Have you heard of Bouvard and Pécuchet? It's Flaubert. Have you heard of Flaubert? Pick up Bouvard and Pécuchet. Look at the first page. That's how you do it. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, just read it. Goes, 2 men. They get together. They're on a bench. They walk up a hill. Read it. See how he does it. I'm like, okay. I went and got Bouvard and Pécuchet. I even read Sentimental Education. Did not give me any insight how to fucking write exposition. Nonetheless, I appreciated the advice.
Should we do more questions?
This woman here.
Yep.
You.
And then we'll go back to you over there.
I know your structures are very complex, but can you talk about the pressure to keep the budgetary pressure to dumb down some of the dialogues in your film, and how you deal with that?
We were talking about this a little bit at the break, and this is an enormous problem in my world, and it's like the most painful thing on earth that personally I go through, which is people don't understand. So make it more of a common denominator you know, and the more a budget goes up, the more pressure there, you know, the more fear is in the room for the people who are making the decision. And I feel for those people, you know. Warner Brothers put up $50 million for SYRIANA, you know, that's a big call, and they're giving it to me, and let's get that guy who made Abandon, you know, like they're taking a big risk. And so I was saying that, because she happens to know that I like a lot of films by, say, Elaine, you know, Renee. I like a lot of obscure films, and I like films that tend to have abstraction in them. But I was saying that I believe that the problem is the same problem for everybody, which is that you have an obligation to clarity that increases with the cost of what you're making. And that is an inescapable fact. And you can pretend it doesn't exist, but it does exist. And you fight this battle in 1,000 ways. And the best thing you can do is at the very beginning, is when you're talking about what you're going to write, if you're in business with some people, try to be sure everyone understands what you're talking about. I had the misfortune of referring to the film Repulsion to a studio head 1,000 times. When she watched my director's cut of the film, it turned out she'd never seen Repulsion. How do I know she'd never seen Repulsion? Katie's crazy. She can't be crazy. She kills people. She can't, her audience won't let her kill people. She can't kill people. But it's like Repulsion. That's the point. She's the golden girl who goes crazy and kills 2 people. It has to be the boyfriend. The boyfriend doesn't exist. He's only in her mind. It doesn't matter. It has to be the boyfriend. The boyfriend did it. Like, okay, I'll humor you for 1 second. Let's just imagine it's the boyfriend. We don't have a single frame with a corporeal antagonist to do what you're talking about. You can fix it in post with sound. Anyway, example of making sure your horses are all running in the same direction early as possible. Know that, you know, depending on what your budget is, scene by scene, you can have the most highfalutin references, dialogue, you know, philosophical discussions. You can have Euripides having a fictional conversation with Sophocles in Greek if the emotional stakes of the scene are clear. If you understand that Euripides thinks Sophocles is a moron, and Sophocles knows that, and he feels bad about it. If Euripides is sleeping with Sophocles' wife.
Or if I'm sleeping with Sophocles'
If
wife.
Robin's
More
and
likely.
so, but again, this is like the hardest thing, I think, in our art form. I mean, it's the hardest thing on earth, is that drama, you know, Patty Chayefsky said it, drama is emotion. Drama is emotion. And I talked about this with John, I can talk about transitions, context, characters, story. Fuck that. Fuck it. The first thing I do I care? Do I care? I mean, you know, there are enormously abstract moments in 8½. You know, I pointed out there's that window where I think the thing really lags. It's not a perfect film. I think Z is a perfect film. I love 8½. It might be my favorite film. But I don't think it's perfect in the way Z is perfect. It has flaws. You know, why does it start to drop you? Where is the emotion? You know, you can get away with anything if people know what they're rooting for. And that doesn't mean it has to be dumb or simplistic. Usually it's a failure of talent. Usually it's a failure of talent. It's not an excusable problem. You can't say, well, you don't care because you're dumb. It's never, they don't care because they just don't feel anything. And if you can first make them feel, you can get away with anything. And it's really tricky because, you know, if you want to put a hero in jeopardy, have a guy get a girl, someone pet a dog, you can get away with anything.
Well, you know, I also want to say, too, just about emotion. If you had this played an exercise with you know, just with yourself, like one of my emotions that comes up a lot is anger. I get really, really angry about stuff, but like really passionately angry. You've heard some of my speeches. And this last year, I've had this experience of something pissing me off and really seeing what a great gift it was, because it motivated me, like in a way, like I didn't have to think about anything. I sat down and just wrote something. It wasn't, you know, a movie. But if you think of one emotion, a strong emotion or anger that comes up for you tomorrow, write anger at the top of a page, and then write a paragraph about what made you so angry, something else that made you that angry. Observe, this is how I wash dishes when I'm angry. This is how I deal with my boss when I'm angry. And just look at that. It will start giving you some ideas for how you can get emotion into your work. Just a little exercise I just made up on the spot. I like it, though.
I'm loving that.
Hi, my question goes back to, I know that you've worked a little bit in television as well, and the whole process of kind of being lost in a story and not knowing where it's going and, you know, taking 2.5 years to find something. When something's shooting on Monday, how do you force it? I mean, how do you deal with very specific time restrictions and schedule and budget restrictions?
There is nothing better than a deadline. I mean, you know, the most valuable thing I learned, and I've encouraged so many people to work in TV and get jobs in TV, and I've helped a lot of people get jobs in TV. And you know, a friend of mine is switching to my TV agent like this week because I'm seeing he's gotten a job in TV and he was a journalist. And it's twofold. One, the thing you learn is, particularly at least I learned, is that often what I thought the scene was about turned out after it was shot not to even be what it was about anyway. So I was constantly surprised. This is because I was starting out and I didn't understand. And so the other thing is that if you have this perfectionistic tendency like I have, and you think you can go over the first 20 pages 100 times before you move to page 21, which everyone tells me is not a healthy way to do things, TV's an enormous relief. Furthermore, you're often working with established characters who have lives. It's not an endless possibility, you know. Sipowicz, in you know, of all the things that could happen in my episode of NYPD Blue, he was not going to fuck a guy. You know, it just wasn't. And so there's this whole backstory of things that exist, so you're relying on that. You're also working a lot of times in collaboration, where you're like fixing something, you're jumping in, you're doing an act of someone else's thing, you're working off an outline that was broken by 5 people. You're under this enormous time pressure, but it's also been a collaborative form all along. And anytime the responsibility is spread among multiple people, the pressure's off. It ain't your fault. It ain't your fault. And that's the joy and the curse of television. Because, you know, it's like this enormous relief on some level, and then there's an attendant, you know, problem with it unless it's the voice of your show. And what I felt like in television, and I walked off the practice. I went into David Kelly, and I think he was maybe going to fire me, but I'm not sure. I said I can't do it anymore. You know, you write all the scripts and you don't need me. And he was just so surprised. You know, he couldn't believe it, and I was just like, I don't know what I want to do, but this isn't what I want to do exactly because it's your thing. And at that point, I had learned like 1,000 million lessons. You know, I'd learned how to write dramatic scenes. I'd learned how to write shootable scenes. I'd learned how to write different voices. I learned how to deliver on a deadline. I learned how to write for budget. I remember I was a staff writer on American Gothic, and we brought in the pro from Dover, like the supervising producer, who was making 100 times as much money as I was making. I was getting $712 a week after taxes and split my check. $712. I'm like, you know, that's awesome at that point, by the way. It was a fortune. But this guy's making millions of dollars. And he writes, fade in, a runway at night, a 727 sits in a rainstorm, thunder cracks. And I'm like,
Right, we can't afford that.
in what planet, what universe is there a Air 727 on a runway in a rainstorm at night in an 8-day shoot? I'm like, I even know this. And so the process of it was, because the machine is moving and the beast is chewing up that all the time and it must be fed. You learn not to be precious. You later find out the shit you were precious about wasn't even what the thing you should have cared about. And you learn so fast. And it's like, it's the greatest boot camp for writing, I think. And also, as has been pointed out many, many times, it's like a lot of the best writing is being done there. You know, I think because of, you know, the thing that once you establish you're making money and advertisers are buying in, the show creator gets a hell of a lot of power. And you can start doing all sorts of things. And that ongoing ability to take additional risk in success doesn't really exist in the movie business. It's just a crapshoot. And so,
well, also it has a lot to do with,
you guys would know
if a show is is specifically created by whoever created it. In other words, it goes back to that life thing. If it has a life, if the characters have a life and a logic, if it has a beating heart, then you can get in a zone where you're solving problems at a much higher level than you could solve them. You're just kind of fizzing along, so you can access things much more quickly. And it's what I think what Stephen was saying about the deadline and boundaries, and there's a lot to be said for all that.
And you know, just when you were just saying that about the beating heart, I was just thinking about what I was working on today, and I was just like, why doesn't it have a beating heart? Like what? You know, and I just, you know, I'm thinking about it all the time, and a lot of times my best insights come right when I wake up. I wake up with a thought in my head, like that voice about duck salad, or I wake up with, I completely changed how this movie worked 2 weeks ago, just by waking up with the first thought in my head was, you know, this one character needs to have a mission. He just needs to have a mission. It's too abstract. And so I wrote this long section in Washington, and now it has a mission, and you know what, it actually was so much better than like the 80 other pages I'd written that it eradicated them. It's so depressing. You know, it just the bar got moved on these 8 pages that suddenly made it really clear how weak 80 other pages were. And I'm trying to hang on to them.
But it's good, it's good.
I'm just trying to hang on to them. I don't want to give them up, but they're all going away.
We have time for another question. This guy in the
Hey,
corner.
oh my gosh. Are you guys want to hang in for a couple more questions?
Can we-
Yeah?
Okay.
I'm fine. I'll stay. Anything but facing this script at home. Believe me.
Where did the title for Syriana come from? And will you ever, maybe in the Writers Guild Library, make that full original version available?
Right now, they had promised me that I could make my director's cut at Warner Brothers, and I'm trying to get them to let me do that as we speak, and hopefully they will. And I'm going to try to publish a book with both Traffic and Syriana in it, in their original, in the version that I think is the best version. In Traffic, I think it would actually be the version you saw. Although there's some extra scenes that are, I think, interesting. They don't take away. Syriana, there's a way better version. At one point, you know,
Stephen, would you make that available? Would you be willing to make the Syriana draft that you're happy with available in the library, so if people wanted to look at it, they could?
of course, yeah, no problem. And I kind of have to cobble. I don't even have it totally cobbled together. I have to do a couple things.
After you cobble it?
Yeah, but
That cobbling could take a while.
no, I'm not gonna. I don't want to change it. I have a good draft. I just don't quite know where it is. It's in a folder, and like I just have to look at it. Because I end up writing like real final script for publication, and then no real final
This is the one.
2, and then like you look at another folder and you see real final script for 3, and you're like, oh shit, and there's like this one for publication. Shit. Fuck. And so it's just on and on. What was the question? I'm sorry. Oh, title, Syriana. Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. Oh my God, it's so unbelievable. I haven't thought about this in so long. I was in a very famous guy's office at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank in Washington. This is a guy who helped bring us Iran-Contra, but he's back, and he's a PhD, and he's got this great plan, which is he's brought into his office 2 Russian scientists, crazy Russian scientists, and they are lunatics, and they are con men. And what they have is rainmaking equipment. And the rainmaking equipment, by their own admission, doesn't work. And it costs $5 million. And the plan is to sell it to Sheikh Rashid of Abu Dhabi, who's very wealthy. And because he wants to make Abu Dhabi the green state. He's the green sheikh. He's going to make it a garden paradise. And the way to do that is with rainmaking equipment, because if you've ever been to Abu Dhabi, it's arid, to say the least. And so the plan is we're going to take the rainmaking equipment and the Russians, we're going to take them to Abu Dhabi, and we're going to sell them to Sheikh Rashid for $50 million. Why $50 million? Why not? What are we going to do with the money? I'm just sitting there going, I cannot believe this. This is fucking serious. Lynn Cheney's like walking in and out of the office, and like people are going by, and Richard Pearl's there, and it's just like this big party. And they say, let's see, what do they say? Oh, right, here we go. Well, we're gonna have 45 million in profit, and we're gonna pay the Russians 5, and we're gonna take 10. There was another guy there I can't mention, but we're gonna take 10 for the guy whose plan it was, and 10 for the guy whose office it was. Just a little taste, a little something, wet the beak. 10 million, 10 million. 5 is the actual cost of the machinery, another 5 for the Russians. So that's, what is that, 30. And with $20 million, we're going to overthrow Iran. And I'm like, how? He said, he said, this is a liberal population, they're not a bunch of mullahs, dirt mullahs and turbans who want to turn the clock back to the fucking 5th century. These guys are educated, the women are educated. It's a moderate population, and they're about to tip. They are about to tip. And what you do is you buy favorable press, you put mobs in the streets, and they are one match away from that conflagration, and $20 million will put them over. I'm like, and by the way, this is exactly what we did in Iran in 1953. Exactly. And in 1979, when they took over that building and held those hostages, that was the exact building where Kermit Roosevelt planned the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. Democratically, there was a democratic revolution. The Shah of Iran was in Switzerland skiing. Iran in 53 is a democracy with a prime minister who comes into the United States, is on the cover of Time magazine, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. He's overthrown consciously, willfully by the CIA, by Kermit Roosevelt, who does it brilliantly out of the building where they hold the Americans hostage in 1979. This is a game plan that works. We know how to do it. And these are exactly the guys who do it. So as preposterous as this plan was, it has a historical precedent. So I'm just going, wow. But, it's weird. And I'm like, all right. So, and his plan was overthrow Iran, make a new state, a new country, favorable to American interests, favorable to Western-style capitalism, out of Syria, Lebanon, Iran, part of Pakistan. It's roughly the old borders of the Persian Empire, because you can do business with Persians. They're not Arabs. They're not Muslim. They're Persians. That's what this guy's saying. I'm like, and what are we going to call it? The new country. He's like, I don't know. Maybe SYRIANA? I'm like, that's got a good ring. I like it. And I had that explained because of all those problems with people wondering what a movie's about, where the title comes from, and confusion and whatever. I shot a scene with William Hurt and George Clooney. It's a wonderful scene. Hurt is so good. So good. And this is the magic, by the way, of filmmaking. As you guys know, to nth degree. We had an angle raked off the back of his shoulder. And William Hurt is so brilliant. The entire tragedy of America's foreign policy since 9/11 is in his expression of what they are trying to do and how it isn't going to work, and the problem of nation building in this country, in these countries. And I had a line that I also cut, which was where the prince said, "We have 28 tribes in my country, and we all hate each other." I learned that. We had this thing, and then Hurt explained SYRIANA, and it was so emotional. And the amazing thing about filmmaking is, camera is shooting at him. He does it. It's incredible. There's no emotion in the print. There's nothing. Like, it was an amazing performance. We adjusted the camera like 2 inches to the side, went 10 millimeters longer on the lens, did the exact same performance, and it was just, you had shivers. Nothing changed except this tiny, tiny thing. Unbelievable. I cut it. I didn't want to explain it. I felt like at the end of the day, it would have been misinterpreted. It was too reductionary. So, but I did explain it.
Wow.
One last one. It's going to be hard to top that, but one last one, and then we need to let Mr. Gaghan.
Hey, real quick. I was curious about something.
All right, 2.
You kind of touched on reworking your scenes in your script, but do you actually retype it? Do you print it out, look at it, make your corrections, and then retype it into the computer?
I really believe in editing by hand, and I wish they were interested. You guys were interested in having like traffic stuff, which I actually threw out so much of, and I have some in storage, but I couldn't find it. And but my scripts are they look like bloodbaths at times. You know, I used to edit in red. Got too depressing. I switched to pencil after I went. But I really fetishize it. I have a very specific way of doing it, and I think that you have to look at it on the page. And the weirdest thing about script writing to me is I work, and I'm certain things are working, but in my heart, I know they aren't working. I just know. You know, I convince myself, and that's the phase when you're reading scenes to friends over the phone. You're telling your wife. You're like, you've got everyone. Your lawyer. You know, you're telling stories to your agent. But what happens is something magical happens in the editing process where I can just glance at a page and there's something in the balance of exposition and dialogue and I know it's a scene. I just know it works. I don't even have to read it. It's like weird. It's just somehow it gels into something and I know it works. And it takes a long time, to get there. And I've watched very good writers edit on the screen and I think it doesn't work as well as on the page. It can work. It's fine. I definitely do editing on the screen. I definitely do. But the real editing happens on the page. And it's so frustrating because my edits tend to look like, this has to go here, and this has to go here, and that's stretched out, and there's something from page 9 pages later that's now going to go here, and now these 2 scenes on page 35 and 39 are going to become one scene, and they're going to be on page 14. And so there's just lines and arrows and asterisks and notes. And you get through it and you're like, oh, thank God, I'm done with that. And then you have to type it in. And it is so frustrating and so tedious. A, I can't read my handwriting. B, it is menial at a level. And yet, it's really humbling. And then you do another pass, off this document. And furthermore, as the trail of breadcrumbs gets more and more scattered and eaten by giant birds who are always following you, devouring everything behind you, you have a stack of 40 drafts with dates. And in February, I had a good idea on the second act. If I had to look in a computer, I'd never find it. But I can kind of go through, and I remember that amount of blood red splotch on page 19, and I remember that I marked out really angrily pages 20 to 9, and I'm like, oh right, it's in here somewhere, and then and you dig it up, and I just think, it it worked for Shaefsky, and it worked for Faulkner, and it worked for all those guys, and it's just like, I think there's something too facile. The technology's too facile.
You can just see how turned on he gets by the subject. And that's what you should feel about what you do, because it's too hard. Look at what the torment he's gone through. But there was one thing that got him through it, but I'm serious. The thing that got him through it was that little thing that was bigger than the torment, which was
Xanax.
Xanax, but I must tell this story. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was incredible.